Good to see everybody after the holidays. We have had one request for an excused absence from Glenn Taylor. Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Taylor from the meeting today?
So moved.
All right, I got Ken with the motion and Terrell with the second. All in favor? Vote by show of hands. Great. That is approved unanimously. On the minutes for approval from our December meeting, I do have one revision. Reverend Taylor did request an excused absence for that, and we did not mark that absence as excused. So if it's all right with everybody on the commission, we'll make that note and revise that. Were there any other changes that were requested on the December minutes? All right, so then I move to approve the minutes from the December meeting with the revisions for an excused absence for Reverend Taylor. Is there a second? Got Mr. Senior, and all in favor? All right, approved unanimously. Wayne, I think at this point we'll turn it over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first note I'd like to make is, as some of you may have noticed, we do have a new commission member. Mr. Joseph Stansel was appointed by City Council this past Tuesday, and we appreciate his engaging very rapidly and making time in his busy schedule to make this meeting on very short notice. So welcome, Mr. Stansel. And it may be appropriate at this point in time, if you agree, Mr. Chair, Mr. Stansel could give him a brief introduction, perhaps?
Yeah, that'd be great. Mr. Stansel, I think you're on mute right now. We're not picking you up on the volume.
Can you hear me now?
Got you now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miles, for allowing me this time. And I have been a resident of the city of Raleigh for just over 1 year. I have an extensive background in general contracting. Currently, I own an outdoor advertising business with most of my locations being in Western North Carolina. I am passionate and eager to learn about this committee's functions and duties, and look forward to being of service however I can. But due to my the minimal time that I had to prepare for this meeting, I do hope that y'all will steer me in the right direction should the time arise.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Stansel, thanks for being willing to participate, and we'll look forward to getting to know you a little bit more and get your input on some of the issues coming through the commission this year. So thanks for being willing to serve.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I might note Mr. Stansel brings land use planning and zoning experience, which is, you recall, from the policy that was recommended by SMAC and adopted by Council a little over a year ago. That was one of the areas of expertise that SMAC recommended would be helpful to have, but yet had been unfilled and previously missing. So we appreciate that expertise and think it will be helpful to the commission.
Thank you.
Okay, the next topic we have is several high priority topics. One is an upcoming meeting related to the Upper Durant Lake study. Kevin Boyer, could you please give us a quick update on what's going on there?
I'd be glad to do that. Make sure you hear me.
Yes.
Okay. Over the last couple years, really ending about a year ago, we conducted a study of the upper of 2 lakes at Durant Nature Preserve for the possibility of turning it into something other than a lake, a water feature, and an asset to the park, given that the city needs to make some investment in the structure of the lake anyway. So the decision was made to look at possible alternatives to the lake given that there is a lake there, another lake in the park serving that purpose. We conducted a study of alternatives, finished it up about a year ago. We're ready to go to take it to a public meeting, but given COVID and then given work on the city's lakes policy, which has since been adopted by City Council, we held off on that and have now scheduled that. So that's scheduled for next week, 6 o'clock next Tuesday. There's a web link to that and a survey that you could take for that. Following that public meeting, there'll be a meeting presentation to the Parks Board, and then back to the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission for a recommendation to City Council under the lake policy. So look for that in let's see, in March, the March meeting. Wayne, would you like me to carry on to the next one as well?
Yes, please do, Kevin.
Okay. The city is about to post a public notice of availability of our what's called the Stormwater Management Plan, required under our permit with the State of North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, to be updated every 5 years and for a public comment to be offered. That should be posted in the next few days. It will be open for about a month, and we will receive and respond to comments and make any warranted adjustments to the plan before submitting it to the state a few months out. And we'll give you an update on the status of comments received at the February meeting a month from now. That's it, Wayne.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And then the third and last item on the priority topics is the fiscal year 2022 budget. We are in the middle of preparing the operations and the capital improvements budget. And later in the agenda, there is an item where we'll talk in a little bit more detail about the budget and level of service options and get some feedback from the commission on priorities related to that. But did want to tell you at this point, we are moving forward with submitting what we're calling our base budget. That's due to our budget office by February 5th. At this point, the way we are proceeding, as we did last year, we are submitting a base budget with no rate increase proposed. And but there will still be an opportunity based on your feedback, based on council feedback, to revise that should a level of service be selected and recommended that is higher than this base case. So this is part of the standard process, but did want to explain that to you. We have recently found out that the budget presentation to council for stormwater and the other enterprise funds, which include Raleigh Water, parking, and solid waste, are the separately funded enterprise funds within the city, meaning funding does not come from the general fund, the city's general fund. So that presentation will be made to the city council at their March 15th work session, and we'll be on the agenda to make that presentation. So we still do have time to prepare our level of service options and prepare that presentation for that March 15th council presentation. And then the last item, our standard notices prior to construction. We do not have any projects to announce at that point. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Gotcha. Thanks, Wayne. Are there any questions from members of the commission for Wayne on those updates? All right, cool. Not at this time. All right, Justin Harcum, are you ready for our Raleigh Rainwater Rewards Project review?
Thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. We can go ahead and jump right into it. January marks the time for the quarterly update to the commission on the Rainwater Reward Program. You'll see included in your backup material a brief memo describing number of projects approved and number of projects that have been completed in the last quarter. It's been a busy period last couple months. You also see a large table showing all previously approved projects with attention drawn to projects that have recently approved and completed. So just want to take this time to ask if there were any questions on that information that was included in the backup material. And if not, I can move on into the project I have on the agenda.
Yeah, any questions for Justin from members of the commission on the quarterly update?
All right, great. Go ahead and move forward. I have one project today to present to the commission. It's a rain garden project that exceeds the staff level funding threshold of $5,000. It's located off Sampson Street in the Crabtree Creek watershed, eligible for 75% reimbursement. And as stated there, it's 500 square feet of rain garden. Is actually two features that'll be used to capture a little over 3,000 square feet of runoff that's originating from driveway and from pretty much their entire house, as shown on the right here. Next slide, please. You can see here the projected cost, the breakdown. Nothing really out of the ordinary here, pretty standard. All things have been reviewed and deemed eligible for reimbursement through the program. And you can see the 75% breakdown at the bottom here of the table. Next slide, please. You can see here the water quality considerations. The nitrogen metric is slightly above the mean, but well within the high and low marks of previously and recently approved projects. Next slide, please. And you'll see in this next slide where it ranks compared to all previously approved rain gardens. I did pull out the bioretentions. And if you want to hit the next slide, Kelly, you'll see a zoomed in excerpt of this slide, so it might be a little bit easier to see. A lot of these are the same numbers shown on the water quality consideration slide, 2 slides back. This project will be subject to a 10-year maintenance period. The fact of the amount of money they are requesting, exceeding $5,000. And at this point, I'll take any questions that the commission might have on this project. Next slide, please.
Yeah, any questions for Justin on this project?
Yeah, it's Mark Senior. I saw that the design cost is really low on that. Was the owner designing that, or who's handling that, Justin?
I can give you the exact name. No, sir, it's not the owner. It's actually a landscape architect. What we're really seeing in the rain garden, say the rain garden world, with these rain garden applications is a lot of folks are starting to team up with some landscape architects, and then they are in turn teaming up with some contractors who are well versed in installing these. And so they're almost package deals when they approach, or when the applicant calls, they can come back with, yes, we'll design and install, really 2 entities being involved there. So this was a landscape architect that has done work through the program in the past, and then they have teamed up with a contractor who has also done work through the program in the past.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to that. I just was kind of surprised it's a low fee on that. I think that's great that they can get a design at that kind of cost.
Any other questions for Justin on 303 Sampson Street? All right, no other questions at this moment. Is there a motion to approve the project? All right, I got a motion to approve from Mark Senior. How about a second?
And second.
I got a second from Tyrrell, and all in favor? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed? All right, I think I've got 6 yeses, Wayne, and 1 opposed.
I think I might have confused you.
Okay, so I had John opposed. How about you, David?
I'm for it. Yes.
Okay. So Wayne, I had 6 in favor, 1 opposed.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you guys. Appreciate it, Justin.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Mr. Chair, yeah, just one related comment to R3. We are planning to bring back, there were some questions related to green roof specifically that the commission has made, that we are planning to bring back some ideas on how to address that at the February commission meeting. So just wanted to let you know we haven't forgotten about that and plan to bring some suggestions back on how to address that.
And Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Kane, go ahead.
Yeah, so I also sent to Wayne a few concerns and comments related to rainwater rewards. If you don't mind, I'll rattle through those quickly and we can consider whether to have a larger policy discussion at a future meeting on these. One is the cost per pound of nitrogen removed. I recognize that this is sort of an incentive program to create showcase type of installations. But when you put that number up in front of me, I keep sort of asking myself the rhetorical question: would we pay people to simply not fertilize their lawns at anything comparable to those rates? I'd like to have a little more background information about minimum design criteria. We certainly have had the conversation about green roofs recently, passive drawdowns on cisterns, and that sort of thing. And I wondered if there's other commission members who would be interested in considering some kind of test related to household income or assets related to the applications. I think we've seen a number of very high profile or high level properties come through, and not sure if that's something that the commission would like to go for, but it's on my mind, along with equity and application of the program, recognizing that lower income residents are less able to invest in improvements to their property, so they're perhaps not in a position to make these kinds of showcase installations. But I am a little concerned about issues of equity and handing out public money to people who tend to have means.
Gotcha. Thanks, Evan. I think those are all good comments and points for discussion. Wayne, what do you think about creating an agenda item around the Rainwater Rewards program, and we can sort of loop this into the green roofs discussion, and I think this could be a much lengthier discussion than what we have time for today.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, we'd be glad to add this as a future agenda item and broaden the discussion from just green roofs to the program in general, and perhaps bring some ideas on, as suggested by Mr. Kane and maybe some others on how the program could be revised for further discussion. Be glad to do that. I'll work with staff to see if we need maybe one additional month to move it back, instead of bringing it back in February, maybe bring that back in March, but we'll bring it back one of those two next meetings for further discussion. Be glad to.
And recognizing that these are pretty big policy questions, and they might lead to drawn out discussion. In the meantime, we're going to continue to have applications for the program. I'd be happy to see a discussion of the green roof question on its own at the next meeting, so that we can maybe, I think we have a chance of arriving at some clarity on that question in much shorter order, and that could guide future applications.
Yeah, I'd agree with
If that's
Evan on that one. Go ahead and move the green roofs question forward and look at the bigger issue of the overall equity and funding for the Rainwater Rewards program. It's a longer term, bigger picture item.
Good, we'd be glad to do that. And that would help, because as you recall, we do have, I think, 2 deferred applications related to green roofs that it would be helpful to provide those applicants an answer. So we'll proceed with bringing something back in February, at least related to the green roofs. And we'll see if we can bring some broader issues as well by then.
Thank you.
Good suggestion. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. All right, Mr. Boyer and Mark Sr., we're looking forward to getting an update on advancing green stormwater infrastructure within the city.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick this one off for the benefit of Joseph, our new member here, just going to throw a little bit of background to get everybody back up to speed. We're talking about the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Program, which used to be called Low Impact Development, but it's looking at reducing stormwater impacts on a site-by-site basis, trying to replicate the natural process of stormwater infiltration and evapotranspiration, reducing runoff at the source. And it's a program that Raleigh's been working on for years. I think I started on it 10 years before I retired from the city. But most recently, the city council had proposed making some green stormwater infrastructure requirements mandatory, and then they backed off of that a little bit and suggested that we make that emphasize or encourage the use of green stormwater infrastructure, GSI. And so that was kind of put back on the Stormwater Management Commission as a task as to how to do that. And Kevin and his staff put together some recommendations on how to do that, formed a stormwater GSI subcommittee that's been working on this. And they've done a lot of work on that to date, working with staff to develop, remove impediments from existing ordinances, develop incentives in the ordinances, developing materials that educate people, working on a program to actually look at the costs of doing that. And most recently, one of the goals or tasks in that program for the city to lead by example and try to look at how we would implement GSI on City of Raleigh projects. And so a policy was developed and drafted as to how we would do that. And one of the components of that policy would be applying that to a couple of city projects to see how it would play out. And Tetra Tech has been working on that and has prepared that. And I think Trevor and his staff are going to present on that today. So we'll hear from them. And the other thing with that information coming back from Tetra Tech, we're probably ready to have another GSI subcommittee meeting. And so we'd be looking to schedule that sometime January 15th to 22nd, somewhere in that window. And Kevin will send out a poll to see what we can get together on that, with a goal of kind of finishing up this GSI work and having a draft report to go to the city council sometime in March. I think, I'm not sure when their March meeting is, but shooting for sometime in March for that. So that's kind of where we are with the GSI work. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin and Trevor to go ahead and talk about the information we have available today to present to us.
Thanks, Mark. You covered it real well. I'll add a few points that City Council did not give the commission a deadline. And the first time they did, the second time they did not. And it has been going on for some time, delayed considerably by COVID. But now we've got good traction. We've made good progress and want to bring our subcommittee back up. The timeline that Mark mentioned would have us going to City Council, have the commission reporting to City Council probably the second meeting of March, which is the 16th. and which then means the commission would need to approve, make the approval and recommendation of a plan at their March meeting at the very latest, and even that would be a little tight. Which means then we will need to get a good working draft for the commission to review and comment on for February meeting. So we'll have a very busy committee meeting in January, and we'll be providing lots of material for the committee to work with at that meeting. A big part of what we need to do to report to City Council remains to be written, but we've made good headway for what to put into that, and those are case studies of GSI and the use of our draft policy, and maybe probably adjusting the draft policy. We have made a lot of progress drafting the front end of a report to City Council. Front end being looking back. Mark mentioned a lot of history. And there is not much institutional memory on the part of City Council about where we've been. And the thought is that if recommendations for the future are going to make sense and have context, we need to give some history on where we have been and how we got to where we are. So that will be another thing for the committee to work on in January, and for the commission to look at in February. About those case studies for testing the policy, and we chose 2 sites, very challenging sites, but they give the policy a good test, and the tools that go with the policy a good test. One of them is a downtown city project, and the other is a city expansion of a city park. Our consultant Tetra Tech has been helping with that. Trevor Clements with Tetra Tech has been our project manager for this work since 2013, and is here to help us. Just a brief, 5 or 10 minute synopsis of where we are on those 2 case studies. Trevor, if you're still on, please pick it up.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yes, I think the idea in using the 2 case studies had multiple purposes. One is that, of course, we have this draft policy, and we want to test what it would be like to operate under that. As a part of the leading by example, in the city wanting to look at how does it consider GSI up front in a project? There were ideas, and so an initial implementation guide was developed for the staff to work through with a designer for a city project, what opportunities there may be for GSI. So we wanted to test that as well. So we're looking at multiple things that we're wanting to be able to see how it works, and level of effort, can we achieve the goals that are established in the policy? So we will be putting forth a report that kind of says, here's what we found in terms of how we interpreted the policy, and how we walked through the guide is what the Stormwater Management Division staff would be the ones likely doing this in the future, and making recommendations then for either clarifying the policy, or at least revealing to you what kinds of challenges we had, and any recommendations there are, as well as the implementation guide. One of the key things, of course, in looking at these 2 applications that Kevin mentioned, the Civic Campus and Chavis Park, is the applicability component. And under the proposed policy, this falls under the Section 4 applicability, which that means that projects that are at over $500,000 get a little extra attention. And so they wanted to make sure that we're looking at these significant projects for that. There's also 2 parts to that applicability. There is a section regarding grandfathered property. And so, of course, that's property that's already under existing development. And so if it's being redeveloped and there is no change or no increase in imperviousness, then there are no additional stormwater requirements. That, of course, is the case for Civic Campus. But again, the policy states that the city wants to lead by example. So it says, let's go ahead and look at what would it take to the maximum extent practicable to try to achieve that same goal that we have, and that is retaining the stormwater runoff on site for the 90th percentile storm. But there's a caveat indicating that for highly impervious sites, that's going to be pretty much of a challenge. So if you can't achieve that, what can you achieve to the maximum extent practicable? Then the second part of the applicability is to new development or increased imperviousness on the site property. And now that's what the Chavis Park example represents. So it has an existing park, and there's a phase 1 that's under construction now that was considered existing, but there's also a phase 2 with a significant increase, a couple acres of additional imperviousness that we were able to evaluate. So these two projects allow us to look at these two applicability requirements for these larger city projects. Of course, they're complex projects. So what we've done is we've worked with the designers for the city or the city staff that are working with those designers and gotten the plans, specifications. We've gone in and gotten all the background information on the hydrology, the soils, the utilities, and so on. We were able to look at, using our expertise, what the maximum extent practicable might mean for these and incorporating green stormwater infrastructure, in order to see, could we match that pre-development condition. And remember, the policy right now says that consider that a wooded condition. So, quite challenging. So let's first just give a quick, I'll just stay at the high level here. But for the Civic Campus, what we are looking at is a pretty big challenge to get down to the untreated runoff from where the Raleigh Municipal Building is right now, assuming that that would be wooded. That was quite a challenge for that. However, the good news is that by putting in a reasonable amount of GSI that we thought would be kind of the desirable level, and what we looked at were things that tended to have some of the lowest cost per most efficiency, most effectiveness, highest level of performance on that, and also ease of implementation for the city. And what we were able to see was that we were able to look at getting a 69% reduction in the annual runoff for the Civic Campus project. That's about 23,000 reduction in cubic feet of runoff, untreated runoff. And that's a pretty big reduction. Now, it's not getting down all the way to the pre-developed level, but it is a significant amount. Now you might say, okay, so what is the cost to implement that GSI? Well, we were looking primarily at applications on the Civic Campus, so things like elements that related to rainwater harvesting. So it's things like bioretention in the campus and plaza areas, as well as some cisterns for capturing water to use with the vegetation there for those elements and things. We did include a green roof in this process for the eastern building. And what we looked at was a upfront construction and planning design cost estimate of about $3 million. We said, whoa, that's pretty significant cost. To remember, there's no additional stormwater management required, so that's all additional. There's nothing to back off that from. However, we are looking at a project that I believe is somewhere close to $300 million project. So we're talking about 1% of the size. So it is a significant project. Again, since there aren't stormwater requirements because of the no increase in imperviousness, there are no nutrient load reductions, but that infiltration and capture, that on-site of the 69% reduction in load would translate to a similar proportional reduction in pollutant runoff, including things like nutrients. We also had the opportunity through testing this tool. We're using different, in addition to the cost tool, we're using things like StormEZ and other things that the staff would typically be using. We're able to look at some of the peak flow reduction. And in this case, we also were able to demonstrate that there was a fairly significant reduction in peak flow from this. You also have co-benefits associated with this, that things including sort of the amenities of some of the biogardens in the area in the green roof. You have, so there's some building performance and quality of life benefits there. There is some reduction in potable water demand. And you're talking about a building that is in the Walnut Creek watershed, in which we know there are historic issues, particularly downstream flooding. And so again, the city leading by example, there's a benefit of reducing runoff and reducing peak flows. So we're able to kind of say, through this process, we were able to generate that information for decision makers. What we'll be able to do in our report that the committee will be able to see soon is to take a look at some of the recommendations for what were the key things we had to interpret on the policy, and what are some of our recommendations for the implementation guide. And we do have elements that are there. The key that we see coming out of it, and I think the committee can begin to be thinking about a little bit more, is someone's going to have to make a determination on whether they want to spend that additional money on that campus to achieve those kinds of elements. And so we'll be providing a lot of information, but someone still has to make that decision. So the city may want to think, the commission may want to think a little bit more about how those decisions are made in terms of, is that a good use, cost-effective use of money. The second case study in Chavis Park was interesting because, again, we had an existing part and a new part. And so we looked at it in two ways. We looked at it, what if, under that grandfathering clause, we actually also treated the runoff from the existing impervious area to the maximum extent practicable, in addition to the new impervious area. And for that, we had a similar type of thing. We were able to achieve a 62% reduction in the overall runoff, and it's a pretty significant amount, roughly 20,000 cubic feet change. Again, not all the way back to pre-development wooded condition, but very significant reduction. And the cost, including the, in a sense, handling the stormwater from the existing impervious area is fairly substantial. So it's $6 million to accomplish that for having both existing and new developed. There is a peak flow reduction, very substantial peak flow reduction, and again, a reasonable nutrient load reduction as well from that. But we also looked at, what if you only addressed, what if you kept the grandfathered area the way it was, and you looked at just the new development, the required part of it. And then for that, we're looking at being able to achieve 35% reduction in the overall annual runoff from the overall site, which is still, it's pretty good and a strong portion. Of course, the majority of what's on that, the newly impacted, the new impervious site portion of that. And the construction costs and planning and design costs dropped down to about $1.5 million for that. So we could go from $6 million to doing the whole site with the existing imperviousness as well, or about $1.5 million for just the treating the runoff from the newly added imperviousness. And in both cases, we see significant reductions in peak flow and in infiltration runoff. The other thing, though, that $1.5 million cost would be offset some, because there would be there's not a requirement for nutrient load reduction. There's enough pervious land that when you apportion the flow, stormwater flow out to the land, stuff there, they more than meet the requirement for it. So there's no additional nutrient reduction required. However, there would be peak flow to match the pre-development stage. And so there would be a cost for a dry detention pond. And we're going to include that information on the report that's being generated now. So where we're, in quick summary of where we're at in total, we have made it all the way through the 2 case studies. We're in the process of writing that up, and in that write-up, we're interpreting some of the things that will come back to the committee with recommendations on how did we have to interpret the policy? Were there things that were pretty difficult to work with? Do you need to clarify anything? We'll have recommendations for the implementation guide, which was really more of an outline of a process previous. So there'll be some significant recommendations there for what will help the city move forward. And we'll have 2 case studies that are challenging, that help us look at both grandfathered and new areas, and offer insight into what the committee might want to recommend regarding how you take the results of this information and make decisions on whether it's worthwhile to add the GSI to these city projects, so that you're considering it up front. Kevin, with that, I'll stop and open it up for any questions.
Okay, and before questions, I'll just remind everyone that although this was a summary, we realize it was a lot, and that's why we have a committee and to focus in on this. Also, to remind everyone that these case studies are not about designing these projects or even necessarily trying to influence decisions made by the managers of these projects. It's about informing a process. We would like to think that our case study information will be useful to the designers, but it is primarily about informing a process. And we look forward to getting back with the committee shortly. I'll send out a poll on that. And Mark, if you have anything to add, please go ahead. If not, I'll turn it back to the chair.
No, I'm good.
Great. Thanks, Mark, Kevin, and Trevor. Really appreciate your efforts there. It looks like we do have a couple questions. Mr. Kane, you want to ask a couple questions on this?
Just real quick, what was the total project cost on Chavis Park for the project that is actually being implemented there?
Kevin, I don't have that in front of me, but I want to say that it was somewhere in the 50 to 70 million. Am I off there? You're muted.
The whole park design, I don't believe I even have that, Trevor, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Park development costs, I don't think I have that.
Just curious about order of magnitude. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Our peers, our cohorts in the Parks Department will have that. I'll find out about it and get back to you.
Yeah, Mr. Carper, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a quick question. Just a comment. Trevor, did you consider, these site plans, you still have to have traditional drainage elements and costs associated with just what we would do normally with these types of projects? And do you have that as a baseline, or how does that relate to the 6 million and the 1.5 million, or have you considered that?
Yeah. So the challenge was when we got the the Civic Campus one is that there was no additional stormwater requirements. And so there was essentially, the city would have zero cost associated with that. And that's what the designer, when they presented to the council, said, you know, we're no plans to incorporate stormwater management into that. Of course, the city has said, well, wait a minute, we want to lead by example. And so in particular, if we're going to consider something up front, can we consider it now, and what would that mean? So ultimately, though, the cost tool is made, and it actually, you can do it side-by-side comparisons with conventional requirements next to GSI mixed with gray. You know, so you have any two alternatives that you want, you can compare actually side by side. In this case, we had the grandfathered one, and then on the Chavis Park, it ended up not having water quality requirements, and the kind of the level of stormwater management, because it's such a large pervious area, and a lot of where the drainage goes is natural. There isn't a whole lot there. Now there would be. That's why we are incorporating the cost of the wet detention and conveyance for that. And that will take off then from the 6 million and the 1.5 million cost something, and we'll let you know what that is. That's our last calculation here to do this week.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on our GSI policy updates? Great, thanks Trevor, Kevin, and Mark. Really appreciate what you guys are working on. Look forward to seeing that progress. All right, our next agenda item is gonna be Mr. Ben Brown. Ben, are you ready on our floodplain survey results?
I am ready, and hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yeah, we got you, Ben. Thanks.
So, real quick, and I will apologize for this up front. The survey results title was a little bit misleading because our survey is still open January 31st. So these are the preliminary results that I'm just going to go over, and we'll have a more formal presentation once the survey closes. And I'll also give an update as to where we are in the process with the floodplain text change, as we do have some good dates on that. But as far as the survey, so far we've had about 248 respondents to our survey, which is a little bit less than we had for the floodplain stakeholder group. That was right around 400 when we did that different survey. So we're hoping to get a little bit more attention in the next month. And we'll be doing the usual push on social media, and also I think once we go to Planning Commission, it's going to get some more eyes on it and attention. So I think our survey will get a little bit more attention there. As well as the survey, we have the floodplain text change ordinance is posted on our website on the text change portal, which is linked from the same page that the floodplain survey is on, and that's got all the information about the text change on it too as well. But about half of the respondents so far are people that actually live in the floodplain. So that's good. We're getting a good cross section of that. And over half, about 55% of the people are familiar with our current floodplain regulations, which is really good in my mind, like as far as that goes. And the majority of the people are on board with stricter floodplain regulations. Now, it's not a landslide like I would hope, like 99% or anything, but it's about 62% of the respondents so far are in favor of having stricter floodplain, and 18% are a maybe, like on that. So I'll hopefully win some hearts and minds on that one. Of those, just like I say, about half of the respondents do not live in the floodplain. So take that for what it's worth, and staff is going through about 100 comments, which I've talked to some of the people personally that they've emailed me or called me like via phone apart from the survey, and talked to them about that. Some of the questions that I think we need to focus some of our PR on in January is about the takings issue, which is always an issue that people always assume with something like this. So really need to hammer on the variance protocols and things like that, that it's not just an all-out taking. And then also the fact we've had a couple comments about how we set the half-acre size, and staff's meeting internally probably next week to kind of talk about that, to look at the half-acre in size exemption and look at some of the other like alternatives and things like that that we could possibly do, because I have a feeling the planning commission or the city council will probably have that same question as well. So on the planning commission side, we are due to go to planning commission this next Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. at January 12th. That will be a I can't think of the right word for it, but it'll basically just shuffle us to their text change committee. They're not anticipating talking about the text change at their January 12th meeting, but they're going to refer it to their text change committee meeting, which is on January 19th, a week later. And that would be at 4 p.m. So that's where they plan to kind of dig into the details and nuts and bolts, and I'll be giving a presentation at that meeting. And so that's where we are. Once their text change committee makes a recommendation, it'll be back to the full planning commission, and then once the planning commission makes a recommendation, they will refer it back to the city council with a date for a possible public hearing. Based on what I've seen with things like this, we anticipate it not getting to a public hearing in front of city council before the first meeting in March. Because how those things work is council holds public hearings at both their meetings, but only the first meeting of the month is an afternoon and an evening meeting, which means the public hearings are in the evening. So staff would prefer this public hearing be in the evening, so people will be able to attend virtually as possible, like as it goes. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm open for or anything else.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ben. Are there any questions for Ben on the floodplain regulation changes or the survey results? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Kane.
Thanks for that update. Not so much related to the survey, and this may be old news, but at what point do these regulations take effect in a development process? If someone's got a tract of land and they're planning some development, and let's say it has to have rezoning first and so forth, at what point would you say that, okay, that's a fixed condition that doesn't get grandfathered and doesn't allow for building in the floodplain under these regulations?
So in the past, the last time we had a regulation change like this, which was 2006, it's based on the permit issuance date. So it wouldn't matter if you had like a rezoning or anything like that. It would be when your permit was issued, and that's when you'd get grandfathered. You would have to have the permit issued under the old rules. So, for example, a normal ordinance change, and there's never a normal one, so I use that term very loosely, usually goes effective like 5 days after the council meeting. Staff is anticipating city council is probably going to give this at least a month, if not more, to kind of be the effective date. Like once they make a decision on, assuming they make a decision to change the ordinance, of course, that they would give this at least a month. So in that time frame before it went effective, you would have to obtain a flood permit to fall under those old rules. And I will say, from the city council standpoint, almost every rezoning I've seen in the past 2 months, they've been asking for conditions if you do have floodplain on your property to mimic the proposed text change that we're doing now, which has been something that I wasn't expecting, to be honest with you.
And the date you mentioned of the permit is for a flood permit, and is that typically right in conjunction with building permit application?
Yes, usually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
But if they were doing grading, then of course they would need a flood permit for that as well.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Gotcha. Thanks, Ben. Any other questions for Ben?
This may not be for Ben, but for Wayne, do we have any follow-up on liaison to Planning Commission?
No, I'm afraid we do not. We've not had any further discussion on that item. I'll bring that back up with the planning department though, to see where their thoughts stand on that.
Thanks.
And I, if I could just, Mr. Chair, note real quickly for those who are watching participants, I've added a link in the chat if anyone is interested in more information on the proposed floodplain regulations that Ben had was speaking about, including a link to the survey if they would like to fill that out. And there was also a question about GSI that I've put a link in the chat to the city's GSI page for anyone who would like more information.
Great, thanks, Wayne. Appreciate that. All right, Wayne and Scott, I think we're ready to get our level of service updates and options for the FY 2022.
Excellent, thank you. If I could ask Kelly to bring up that presentation, I'll start giving a little introduction. So as I'd mentioned, we are in the middle of the budgeting process for fiscal year 22. And as we did last year, we are asking for input from the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission on different level of service options, where program areas may be expanded and or added in cases where there's some program areas that we're not achieving right now, and potential rate increases that would be associated with those. So what we would like to do is, and I'm going to Scott is going to participate in this presentation as well. We'd like to present some preliminary level of service options and ask for feedback on the priorities at this point from SMAC. So at this point, we're not looking for any endorsement of a specific level of service or a recommendation. We will come back to the commission in February and in March for that. We have a little bit more work to do with the budget office and the city manager's office to understand other budget implications related to indirect costs, any other projections related to economic situations, pandemic related information that they may have. So what we would like to ask for is feedback on relative priorities. We will be presenting the results of your voting exercise that we've accumulated and show you the results of that in building those level of service options. And are we able to bring up the presentation, Kelly?
I mean, Scott was going to do it, but I think he's having some problems, so he's not.
Oh, is he? Okay. Well,
hey, Kelly, how can I transfer that back to you, Kelly?
Yeah, I think you right click on my name.
Okay.
And it should say something about presenter.
Okay, not seeing that yet.
Hey, Colin, can you give that back to me? Because I know you got the rights to do it.
My apologies for the technical difficulties. We'll keep working on that, but I'll go ahead and start talking. As you recall, our mission, just to review that, looks like it's coming up now. So our mission is a review for many of you, and for our new member, our mission of the stormwater program is to manage stormwater to preserve and protect life, support healthy natural resources, and complement sustainable growth for the community. Next slide, please. And there's that mission. Next slide, please. And as previously presented to SMAC, and we appreciate the feedback that we've gotten on this, this is a relatively new vision statement that we're starting to use in promoting our program. Our vision is to be the smartest stormwater program possible to economically and equitably achieve our mission. in short, to be stormwater smart. We presented this vision back in November to City Council and received some very good feedback on this vision statement, as well as the themes that we've been developing around this vision. Next slide. So some ideas and themes that we did discuss at the presentation to council. When we work smarter, we ensure we get diverse community input through SMAC, through this group, as well as public outreach to improve understanding of needs and equitable solutions. And we're continuing to look at ways we can do that both now during the pandemic and remote working situations, as well as how we can continue to expand that once we get back to where we can meet in person as well. We'll update watershed planning to get better data, engage the community, and drive more effective and holistic capital improvement solutions. We're looking in association with the floodplain text change regulations that were just discussed by Brown, looking to improve our flood hazard mitigation program overall through equitable voluntary buyouts, in-house floodplain modeling, and other hazard mitigation elements to that program. Next slide, please. And some other themes. Again, we've been discussing using GSI and city projects to lead by example and encourage green stormwater infrastructure used by private development and developing incentives to drive that usage. As you know, we're developing a revised stormwater design manual, and will improve design standards to mitigate near and long-term stormwater impacts of development considering climate change. And we'll continue to work to reach the community through trusted established leaders and groups to improve engagement, awareness, and knowledge of our program goals and objectives. So all of these themes and ideas we're keeping in mind and looking at these level of service options that we'd like to propose. Next slide, please. And we will apply this be stormwater smart concept and philosophy to all of our programs that support the core mission. Next slide. So here's the remaining items that we'd like to present. I'm going to turn it over to Scott Bryant here in a moment. He's going to review the program benchmarking, talk about the fiscal year 22 base budget, which, as I mentioned, is based on no rate increase. But then we will have several other level of service options to propose, and would like feedback on that. And again, we'd request that feedback be based on the priorities, what those level of services would look like, and we'll come back at a later point in time for any to look for an endorsement or recommendation of a level of service. Scott, I'll turn it over to you there.
Thank you, Wayne. Good afternoon, commission members and everyone. Thanks. It's a pleasure. Happy New Year to you all. Kelly, if we could go to the next slide. We're going to start off with a brief review of the program benchmarking. Next slide. Commission member Mark Sr. put on his consultant hat in November and did a great job sharing our benchmarking results from our peer communities and shared where we are in Raleigh Stormwater relative to our peers. And so in real quick summary, without going into great detail here, we in Raleigh are proud of having a very comprehensive, diverse set of stormwater services. And if you look across our capital portfolio, which is captured on the screen here, everything from neighborhood scale drainage projects to lake related projects, GSIs, as we've been talking about even during this meeting today, master planning, asset management, all the way across the board. We have a very comprehensive set of services and types of projects. The relative size of the circle indicates how deep we are with funding those. So our challenge is our pockets aren't as financially deep in these areas. So we have a wide range of services, water quality, quantity, asset management, planning. We're very proud of being able to deliver those for Raleigh, but we don't go as deep in those areas. You see some of our other communities may not have perhaps as many services, but they tend to have greater resources in those areas based upon their priorities. So that's the quick summary from this. But Mark, thank you for a great job on that back in November. Next slide. And in summary, as we look at some of the financials, we looked at peer communities, the areas served by those utilities, population, the total stormwater budget, the entire stormwater program, as well as the capital program budget, and then where their fees are and things like that. We see where Raleigh is. If we could go to the next slide, Kelly. From here, we'd like to focus on really the budget, the program budget overall per capita in comparison to our peer communities. So you see Raleigh, and this is based on actually a year or so ago, but you see our stormwater budget per capita is around $50, just over $50. The CIP budget per capita is just over 15 and a half, so $15.61. You see that relative to our peer communities, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Greenville, Nashville, Davidson County, and Tennessee, and then Austin, Texas. So keep those figures in mind. We have replicated for you, as asked for by the commission following the November meeting, what our per capita numbers are for both the program budget and the CIP for Raleigh for our base budget, as well as for these level of service options that we're going to keep talking about during this meeting and the next meeting. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's focus in a little bit on our base budget plan. As Wayne noted, this is going to be our submittal coming up in February. Let's talk a little bit about the highlights there. Next slide. So at the highest level, no changes in level of service, no additional staffing positions. As a reminder of where we are staffing resource-wise, we have 119 full-time equivalent, that's the FTE, 119 staff positions. 66 of those are within the engineering services portion of stormwater management. 53 of those are in our RDOT transportation department focused on our maintenance services. So we are one City of Raleigh stormwater team in two departments working and aligned together, but 119 positions. We're not proposing any changes for our base budget. With that, there'd be no fee rate changes. The commission might recall this fiscal year that we're in currently, we have received a 10% increase. Our rate was last year $5 per single family equivalent. It's now $5.50. So that's their 10% increase. That's in effect now. That's the average monthly rate for a single family property owner. We'll talk some more about that here in just a second. Our total program budget for fiscal year 22, and as a reminder, that would begin July 1st of 2021 this year and go through June 30th of 2022 next year. $25.7 million. That's up just about $100,000 over our current budget. And a question that you might have is how can we increase the budget with no fee changes? Thankfully, we're in a continually growing community here in Raleigh. And as we grow and expand, the current rate is able to apply to newly developed properties and expanded properties, therefore increasing our stormwater revenue a little bit. Our total projects budget, CIP budget, will be around $6.25 million. The backlog, the question there, what does that mean? That's our current projection of citywide stormwater needs, and we think this is still fairly conservative, is just over $500 million. So we essentially assume that our budget would be $6.25 million per year, and it would take about 80 years to accomplish that known backlog. And I would put a caveat that does not fully include our asset management estimations. Next slide. The commission gave us some great feedback. You might all recall in October, Wayne asked the commission for feedback on priorities. And this is the summary of the feedback from the commission. So thanks for all this great feedback. And you could vote for first, second, or third priorities. And this is how the votes came out. So you see across the top here, asset management, watershed planning, GSI retrofits received the highest scores. Next highest score was stream bank stabilization. And the next series of higher scores, and these are all important factors, so it's just a matter of which is, a relative importance. Capacity upgrades, this would deal with undersized systems, infrastructure, things like that. drainage assistance, and the flood early warning system. As we continue to have excessive rainfalls here, we just had some events recently. So the flood early warning system received rate support. Thank you for that. Other items that are of priority are our rainwater rewards program and our flood hazard mitigation buyouts. So that's the summary feedback from SMAC, and we've taken that into account along with our overall goals and priorities for stormwater, safety, flood reduction, water quality, regulatory compliance, et cetera, and align those with the base budget as well as these higher potential higher levels of service. So next slide, please, Kelly. So just a little bit on our base budget plan here, and we can, this should have been in your backup package as well. So hopefully you can see that. I'm trying to see it myself. I'm working from the laptop here, but essentially what we've got, what we're presenting to you this year actually is a picture of the entire stormwater program, focusing still upon the CIP and the types of projects within the CIP, but you also see that we've included the overall stormwater program budget, which we think will be very helpful for you. But first of all, for the base plan, again, this will be no rate changes. Single family equivalent unit would remain at $5.50. You would see where that there'd be a $6.25 million CIP total, and you see the allocation there of that CIP. These are approximate. Certainly the things like drainage assistance, there's several of these line items that are general categories within our CIP. They'd be exactly this. Things like major CIP projects, these numbers are approximate. They're close. But you see the prioritization there of the types of projects for that $6.25 million. To the left there, you see our current FY21 budget. And so you can see the comparisons between where we are this year in those categories and where we would be next year, fiscal year 22, under those categories for the $6.25 million. You'll notice a $6.5 million CIP this year to a 6.25. We're seeing about $250,000 increase in indirect costs. That information is still being developed, really even through this week. But our latest estimates are that those costs are going up by around $250,000 or so, $251K. And when there's no changes to the overall budget, that allocation comes from the money that would be available normally for the CIP. So 6.5 million this year, 6.25 million. That's also reflected in the backlog, going up just a relative few years there as proposed. You see the annual CIP dollars per capita, as well as the total stormwater program budget. Again, 25.7 million as proposed for the base, 25.6 million this year. And you also see the total stormwater program budget per cap, which you can compare those back to the benchmark communities from the slide before. Okay, Kelly, next slide, please. Okay, and again, that is the information that we're preparing, finalizing right now for the upcoming few weeks and for the our base budget submittal. And as Wayne mentioned, we'll continue to work with you and our city management team, and of course, ultimately recommendations to City Council for the FY22 budget and plans associated. But real quickly, we'll look at the level of service options. Kelly, next slide. Okay, level of service option number one is following a similar framework that we had last year, 3 higher levels of service. The first one would include a 50 cents adjustment to the single family equivalent. So it would go to $6 if this option were ultimately selected by decision makers. And a reminder that that's the average rate for the average single family property. About 1/3 of our total stormwater utility fee revenue comes from residential. 2/3 of that comes from the commercial sector. So just to keep that in mind, that's why we wanted to include the percentage adjustment of the rate up in the, as you see in the parentheses next to the actual SFE. So that's the actual increase that commercial properties would see, or the typical property owner would see. So that takes our total budget up to CIP budget up to $6.8 million. would reduce the backlog a little bit. Again, we're assuming we'd have more money going forward, working through that same backlog number of around $500 million. We would get it done quicker. And you can see the total budget there at, I believe it's 27.9. I apologize, it's so small on my screen. And then it's you have the per cap information for the overall program and for the CIP. With this, as mentioned, we're not proposing any additional positions in alignment with city, really where the city is right now in terms of a hiring freeze, except for essential positions that are mission critical. Potentially, this could bring additional resources. A rate adjustment of a level 1 or above could bring additional resources to support enhanced asset management, plan review. Again, we're very thankful to have a continually healthy economy and the work there to support plan review, maintenance operations, which is really critical to upping our asset management program, and financial operations. So we just wanted to mention that there would be some potentially additional operational resources to support a higher level of service that could begin potentially with support at as early as a level 1. Kelly, next slide. Okay, level 2 would further ramp up the program. You see this adjustment would be $1.50, and it would bring the SFEU up to $7. And you see the allocation and the growth in the CIP and the growth in individual categories, and also new items that would come in. As just mentioned, flood hazard mitigation program that would support expanded activities to acquire on a voluntary basis flood-prone properties, supporting the new text changes that Ben just talked through. That program would come online, as well as GSI. We've talked a lot about that today, really programmed to support expanded work in GSI, and as well as we've talked for several years now about expanding stream stabilization work. A lot of these stream projects that are showing up for drainage assistance are not scoring as high because they're not as close to structures or streets, that's a good thing. On the other side of that, though, is that erosion is continuing, and we're not able to really address those. So this category of the CIP would allow an expansion of more stream stabilization, more stream restoration work, even in areas where it's not a safety threat, but more of a water quality concern, more of a sedimentation concern, more of a impact to receiving waters type concern. So that would bring the CIP to 9, I think it's 9.25, would reduce the backlog a fair amount as well. And there potentially could be even more resources for heightened maintenance operations to really continue to enhance our asset management, taking care of the system that we own and operate currently, as well as looking to the future. Kelly, next slide. And thank you for that. So again, consistent with the information in your backup package, the level 3 would be our quote unquote highest level of service proposed for fiscal year 22 to begin as early as fiscal year 22. It would bring the SFEU, the single family equivalent unit rate, up to $8. You see the CIP would grow to 13 million. And you see how the categories would grow as well. It would also bring in further categories. A very modest amount of reserve contingency is in there. This is something that we don't really have a whole lot of in the current plan. And so when there's a need for additional resources for a project, say, we really are oftentimes having to look hard to find those resources. So we're very diligently using the funds that we have, but there's not a lot of reserve currently within the system. So this would begin to address some of that as well at a very relative modest level of $200,000 as you see there. But the rest of the portfolio continues to grow. Major projects, the drainage assistance program would grow somewhat. Master planning, this would really, I think in recent meetings we've talked about the need and the goal of updating master plans for our watersheds citywide. Doing those in a much more integrated way. This would allow us to accelerate that program 5 to 7 years or so time frame at this level of service. Other items that come in there, even more resources for an expanded flood hazard mitigation program. With that type of resource, and Ben's on the call and can address this as well, but if there were $1 million, for example, there for flood hazard mitigation, that could open up larger properties potentially for that program as well, based upon priority and based upon voluntary participation. Also, it would further ramp up the streams program as well as the GSI program. So the theme here, these funding allocations, again, draft working as of just a few weeks ago. We hope that you see alignment between the priorities that you expressed to us at the staff level, as well as the overall goals and mission of the stormwater program. So that would bring up to 13 million, further reduce the backlog, and you see the total program information. I think it's 38.3 million total for the overall program, and you see the per cap information. So I know that's a lot right there, and it's a lot of numbers and ideas, but the basic idea that we want to share with you is we're submitting a plan with no changes, keeping the levels of service going that we have and continuing to deliver those as best as we can. There will be options that we'll continue to discuss with you and with all of our decision makers in Raleigh Stormwater and our city council, of course. So I think that is the last slide, Kelly. At this point, we can open up for discussion and feedback, and thank you so much for this chance to share this update.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate that. Are there any questions from commission members on the level of service options or budget for FY 2022? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I just had one question, and the level of service option one, the major CIP budget drops from 2950 on the base plan to 24.4 million in option one. What was the reasoning behind that, Scott?
Yeah, great observation, Mark. I noticed that as well, and I asked the same question to myself. What happened there? Well, what happened is, and it is very similar to the benchmarking results that you all found. We're basically spreading the still somewhat limited resources over more areas. So as we do that, it takes away from, in this case, what's the top line there. So that's really, you see the 500,000 coming in for GSI, and you see additional resources for master planning as well as asset management. So it's really just that, is taking that somewhat modest increase from 6.25 to 6.8, and now that we've added more categories and expanded several, it essentially left not as much for the major CIP category.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I thought that might be the case. I just wanted to make sure that that's what was going on, because it was a little interesting change.
Yes.
Well, my mic, I'm just going to throw out my general thoughts on all of this. I mean, I'm looking at what the city's doing, and primarily at the backlog in a lot of our programs, the major infrastructure CIP projects and the drainage assistance projects backlogs. I mean, I think we need to increase our revenues to address those backlogs. I think those are basic services that the city needs to provide. You know, all the other CIP items we've got in there are also valuable programs, and you know, I'd like to see them funded. I'd hate to see anything cut back. So I'm kind of in favor of pushing the budget up. You know, I mean, on one side, I see the need for us to increase our revenue, but I would caveat that you know, the COVID environment we have now and some of the strains that people have in the economic situations, there may be people where a $2.50 a month increase is significant. To a lot of us, I don't think that is. I hate to put it this way, but I look at it as beer equivalents. That's a half a beer a month that I got to cut back on. You know, it's not a big deal in order to have a first-rate stormwater program. So that doesn't bother me a whole lot, but there are people out there where $2.50 means a lot in a tight time. So that's just my 2 cents in looking at the level of service budgets. And I'll be quiet.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I kind of like to second what Mark said. I think the 80-year, 70-year backlog for CIPs is unacceptable for a city like Raleigh. I just don't think that, we're ever going to catch up, put much of a dent in it if we leave it like that. I understand 50 cents is a lot of money for some people, like Mark said, but I just think this is an investment for the city, for the community. But greater than 35 is still high, but I mean, it's a heck of a lot better than the other two. So primarily, I think the CIP jumps out at me as an endless loop if we don't do something now. The amount of people moving in and the amount of activity going on needs a solid infrastructure to support, and it's just going to be a losing battle if we don't nip it in the bud now.
Scott, I have one question. I'm looking at the normalized, basically the annual total stormwater program budget per capita. And it looks like, let's just look at option 2 and option 3, get us close to $70 and $80 per capita. Can you bring that first slide up? I'm just curious to know how that compares to some of the other stormwater programs out there, particularly Charlotte Mech. Yeah, so it looks like Charlotte Mech is at $102 per capita.
Yes, Jonathan, great question. Kelly, could you go to the next slide after this one here? Yeah, so this is what we're talking about right here, the total budget per capita. And Jonathan, thank you, by the way, for encouraging us to include that after the November meeting. I think it's really, really helpful. So total budget per capita, for example, it's called Charlotte Mecklenburg, but we've confirmed with our consultant team, this is resources for the city of Charlotte. Mecklenburg County Stormwater offers some services within the city of Charlotte. Of course, the city of Charlotte Stormwater does. So while it's called Charlotte Mecklenburg, this is the funding for the city of Charlotte within Charlotte limits. So 102 per cap and 68, almost $69 CIP per capita. And you can see how that varies with the others. Austin, again, has a pretty robust level of funding, 106 overall per cap, but not quite as high as, not nearly as high as Charlotte on the CIP side.
Gotcha. I think that's a really helpful metric for kind of evaluating where we're at and what makes sense or what's reasonable going forward there. So thanks for putting those numbers together. I definitely appreciate that. Any other questions right now for Scott or Wayne on this? Okay, go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, and Kelly, if you could go back to the level of service slide. One question I wanted to, or one item I wanted to make the commission aware of in terms of, the priorities of how we're adding programs as we step up to the level of service options, and make sure this is consistent with your desires, because it's a little bit different than what we've done before. I wanted to point out that going to level of service 1, I think previously last year we had added funding in the stream stabilization program on that level of service 1 option. Based on some of the voting that we got, we had more votes for GSI. Now they weren't, I think more of them were lower tier 2 and 3 votes, but we had more votes for GSI than we did for the stream stabilization program. So the way we've built this level of service, we added GSI under level of service 1, but waited to level of service 2 to add funding to the stream stabilization program. I wanted to point that out specifically because that was different than we did it last year, and ask for feedback from the commission if that is consistent with what you all would like to see in terms of how we're building those priorities. Another item I wanted to point out, the flood hazard mitigation, we did start funding at a modest level at level of service option 2. That was an item that did not get a lot of votes from the commission, but staff thought that because we are implementing the floodplain regulation changes, that having some modest funding in a hazard mitigation and possible voluntary buyout program could be important in the near future. So we have proposed adding some funding starting on level of service 2. So but we welcome feedback, input from the commission on both of those items, as well as any of the other progressions of how we've added and ramped up funding. So any feedback related to those, we'd welcome. I just wanted to point those two out specifically.
Wayne, thank you for sharing that. And commission, the other item I wanted to bring to your attention here that I didn't highlight specifically was sort of in the middle of the chart here, current available funding. Now we've used a little bit of this since I think early November when we last updated. So this is showing 22, just over 22 million. I think we're now like 20.5 million, just over 20 million, but that's roughly where funds that are on hand right now and where they're at by major CIP, drainage assistance, and so on. So we want to share that that's what we have on hand, approved, available for projects going forward.
And to clarify that, Scott, that money is allocated to specific CIP projects already.
That's correct.
So it's not just readily available funds.
That's right.
It has not been encumbered. For example, a project may be under design. We have that funding in there for the construction, but because the construction contract has not yet been awarded, that money's not been, quote, encumbered. So that's what's included in that available budget, but they all are assigned to specific projects already.
That's correct. Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, but that's what we've got available on hand. Just over 20 million currently as of about a couple of weeks ago. I just want to give you that snapshot for where we're at, and then the annual programs going forward would be per those levels of service.
Scott, this is Jamon. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that 1/3 comes from residential and 2/3 from commercial. Is that correct?
Reverend Taylor, that's exactly right. So when we talk about the single family equivalent unit, that's for the single family residential property owners. About 1/3 of the total stormwater utility revenue comes from residential, in this case, single family residential, with 2/3 from probably the best way to think about it is non-single family residential properties. It's generally commercial, but it could be other properties as well, nonprofits, schools, government facilities, anything that's not a single family property. That's where 2/3 of the revenue comes from.
And so these proposed rate changes hit both the residential and commercial the same, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The observation, which is why I wanted to highlight that. So there would be changes for this, first off, we're not proposing any changes, but if decision makers wanted to adjust rates, the rates would adjust for both single family, the average single family, and really all the single family owners, as well as those in the commercial category by those percentages that you see there.
Been consideration given for proportionality that commercial pay a higher rate or higher percentage?
Wayne can probably help here, but I think the principle is the single family equivalent unit, which is 2,260 square feet. That's one SFEU, and so that would be $5.50 a month for that level of impervious. When that is transferred to the commercial category, basically take the total square footage and divide it by that. Yeah, so it's looking at the total revenue that's required to manage stormwater for the city of Raleigh, let's say the bottom line total, and then, equitably divvying that up amongst all of the SFEUs and the SFEU equivalents that are upon commercial property. So it's, in that sense, there's no difference from the impervious basis.
The proportionality is already there. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. That's a great question.
Right. Yeah, and there have been legal challenges to the impervious surface-based concept in the past, and the concept that the stormwater impacts are proportional to the amount of impervious area has been upheld in court. So it's a standard that we're comfortable with in leaving that proportionality based on impervious area. If you go back to before Raleigh had a stormwater utility that was based on impervious area, it was funded by tax revenues. And in that situation, a much higher percentage of the burden goes on residential as compared to commercial. So this is really a more equitable way of paying for a stormwater program in our opinion.
This is David. I wanted to agree with Ken and forgive my ignorance. I'm wondering if this is the best funding mechanism to get to dealing with the backlog.
Yeah, good question. I'll comment on that. It's appropriate. One of the things we are asking our financial consultant to look at for us is bonding, and whether that revenue bonds would be a potential source of financing that would allow us to expend capital funds at a higher rate in the near future. And that was a question actually, Mr. Markham, that Councilmember Buffkin asked at the November work session as well, as whether revenue bonds would be an option for us to consider. We have not used any bonding in the stormwater program in the past, but it is something we're looking at. It is an option. And we have asked our rate consultant to consider what we would need to do financially to prepare for bonding in order to get a good bond rating, so that we'd be able to get good terms to borrow. And they look at items like how much cash do we have in reserve at any given time, how have we been spending our money and so forth. So our financial consultant is going to be giving us some guidance as to, first, whether bonding is appropriate, and then two, if it is, what we can start doing to prepare for bonding and how far out it might be feasible for us to look at selling bonds as a financing tool. Very, very good question.
Thanks.
I got another question, Ken. Mark, when you did the benchmarking, did you consider backlog from other cities on the list, years of backlog, I guess, for CIPs, and how that relates to what Raleigh has?
Yeah, let me get unmuted here, Ken. We really did look at that directly when we were doing that benchmarking. And I would say, based on the chats we had with the different cities, it varies all over the place, but everybody does have a pretty significant backlog. And everybody recognizes those backlogs are probably going to get worse. And we're talking about how to address that, using bonding and other things. The one thing I will offer is that the way Charlotte has decided to address that backlog is by cutting back on their other programs. So basically they're, taking the money from some of their programs and defunding those to throw the money at their CIP program, which is another way of dealing with it. And they cut way back on their private drainage assistance in order to fund their CIP, which they feel is a much more required element in their program. It's a service that they have to provide, as opposed to drainage assistance may not necessarily be considered an essential city service. But everybody we talked to had some sort of a backlog. Nobody is able to keep up with all the CIP needs, especially with the aging infrastructure problem. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question. We didn't specifically try to pin that down. I'm not sure the cities have that information in all cases, but that's just a general feedback I've got.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. That's fine. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken. So Wayne and Scott, just to clarify, right now staff is not necessarily, they're not recommending a rate increase. I know we just did that this past spring, if I'm remembering correctly. Will there be an opportunity for staff to share this level of service presentation with council and the city manager's office to just present the options? And the reason I ask, I think for members of this commission, we all clearly see a need, right? With knowing that there's additional growth, potential additional changes to, our rainfall patterns and climate as well. You kind of hate to let it go another year or two with increasing backlog, with additional demand, additional stress on the system. So anyway, yeah, just kind of what are the thoughts there for how this is shared with council and the city manager's office, and what the potential is for another rate increase going forward?
Yeah, be glad to address that, Mr. Chair. So at this point, we are planning to present all of these levels of service to the city manager and to council. In fact, at the November work session, Mayor Pro Tem Branch specifically said that he liked the fact that we had brought different levels, and asked if we would be doing that again. And so we have committed to council to do that. So and I don't want to give the impression, I'm not saying at this point staff is recommending no rate increase. We just are not ready to ask for an endorsement yet from the commission. And if the commission would like to do that at a future meeting, we are planning to bring this back to you. And if you would like to endorse a rate increase, that would be appropriate. But we think we would like to bring back additional information from the city manager's office on other program areas within the city that may be looking at rate increases. For example, what the city manager's office can provide to us that we can bring back to the commission is a larger picture of what is solid waste doing, what is Raleigh Water doing in terms of proposed rate increases. Are there any other property tax or other rate increases being proposed as part of the budget, and look at the overall budget in the context of that, and not just very narrowly at stormwater, and as well as any other economic projections related to pandemic and other activities, and let the commission at least weigh those factors into any suggestion, recommendation, or endorsement of a level of service increase that you may want to make for stormwater. So I think that's would be appropriate in the future. We'd like to bring back additional information before requesting that.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Wayne.
I think that's a great observation, Wayne, and great information. It's, when I look at the stormwater budget, a $2.50 a month increase is not a big deal, but it's a death by 1,000 cuts scenario where if everybody else is raising the rates, that could have a significant impact on people that are struggling.
Right, exactly.
Gotcha. Any other questions from commission members on the level of service options or comments? Cool. Well, thanks, Wayne and Scott. Really appreciate your efforts on that. That was a really solid presentation. Really helpful, kind of see where we're at on the financials and potential work ahead. At this point, are there any other, well, Wayne, have you received any public comments? I didn't see anything come to the chat box, but I didn't know about your email as well.
I have not received any other comments, Mr. Chair. There've been a few questions that have come to me through the chat that I have addressed in providing some additional information and links to everyone in the chat. So okay. I'll point those out, but I believe I've addressed any questions that have come through chat. Haven't seen any others.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. So at this point, any other final thoughts, comments, notes from commission members before we adjourn today? All right. Well, thank you all very much for the time. Staff, we really appreciate your efforts in preparation today. Wayne, one question I did have, will we do election of officers next month, or will that be in March?
I believe that is in March typically. Okay. I think last year we did it in February because the previous chair's term ended in February. So I think that's why we did it 1 month early, but normally okay. I believe it's in March.
Yep, just confirming.
I'll confirm that before we send out the next agenda, though.
That sounds good. Thanks. Well, really appreciate everything, guys. I move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second? Got one, Mr. Senior. All in favor? All right, that's unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, folks.